Hi, everybody. Welcome to the next episode of The Latest Thread. Unfortunately, we're missing Karen today, but be rest assured she'll be back for our next episode. So we'll just have to manage without her today. So today's topic is mixed bag. In other words, I know we've done those before, but we took topics that will be found on the GMO Facebook groups and some comments and questions from you guys. So we're going to address some of those today. So Sharon, do you want to share your screen and we'll get started?
Sure. Okay, so here we go. Here we are.
Well, this first one is not really a question. It's more of a tip, but tips from you guys will benefit a lot of us. So this is from Cheryl Law Naglis, and she used a handheld steamer to take care of the fullness that was on the quilt in the border. And I know we've talked about it before, different methods, how we can handle those wavy borders and fluffy, quilt tops before we quilt them. So I think that's a great idea to use a steamer. Anyone else? Sharon?
Yeah, I thought it would be a cool way another use for that would be for if you've got your backing, like some of those extra wide backs have wrinkles everywhere, right? Or even just a regular backing from just hanging or folded, however you store them before you quilt them. If you just toss it over top of the frame, and you could use that for getting rid of some of the more stubborn creases, it would be just so much easier than having to, I hate using an ironing board. So that would be handy for that too.
Well, yeah, you're right. Because I used to use wrinkle release spray to do that, for the backings when the clients didn't, press them, because even though, they really should do that, but it affects how I do my job because I would get frustrated to get puckers. So I used to use a wrinkle release spray, but that gets costly. So to have something like the steamer, is probably a much more efficient way in the long run.
Yeah, I've tried water, but I mean, you can make your own homemade spray starch, but I've never tried making a homemade wrinkle release. So I wonder if that's something we could look into.
But
yeah.
I have a steamer, but I've never used it for that. I usually just use it to like a show quilt or something that's been folded up for a long time to do like the creases, but
yeah. Yeah, because you don't really want to get everything wet.
No.
A bit of moisture helps.
Well, great tip, Cheryl Law Naglis. Yes. Thank you so much for sharing. And, that's just another reminder. If you guys have tips that we can pass on, please feel free to post them on any of the GMO Facebook groups with the hashtag The Latest Thread, and we'll be more than happy to share those in our next Mixed Bag episode.
Does she have a pink machine?
It looks like it.
It sure looks like it, yeah.
It does. Oh, I like that. You don't see many of those. Okay.
Well, so Brenda Falong, and I apologize if I screw up the names, but Brenda Falong, this was posted on the GMO Long Arm Quilting Owners Group. And sorry, Brenda, I had to chuckle when I was reading your post. So I bought a Classic Plus GMO. Now I'm afraid to use it. And Brenda, just so you know, you're not alone out there. You're really not. We hear this all the time. And when I got my first long arm, I was right there with you. Because it's a big investment and it's all set up and here we are. So where do we get started?
Yeah, just like anything new that you buy, there's always a learning curve, right? And I think it's just because it's such a big industrial big machine that we're intimidated by it, but you just push the buttons and start playing, and all of a sudden it just becomes really natural. So that's the best way to get over that, is just do it.
Oh yeah, it definitely is. I can remember when we got our first long arm, and the guy came to set it up, and he's teaching us, different things, whatever, how to do a pantograph, and he's like, "Go ahead, you want to do it?" And I'm like, "Could you leave the room? I need you to watch me do it. How embarrassing!" But yeah, it does take a while, and I think it's like you're afraid you might break it or something, but really, that's probably not going to happen at all.
Yeah. Well, there's different thought processes. Like you said, you're afraid you might break it. But Brenda, you bought a Gammill. I mean, I don't think it's destructible in any way. It's really low maintenance, as long as you do your basic maintenance things on a regular basis. It's pretty indestructible. Mm-hmm. And the other part is, like we said, it's a big investment. Quite a few of us bought the Gammill long arm machines because we wanted to build a business. And so now, you're hoping that you can, recuperate some of the expense that you put out there. And so there's pressure, depending on one situation. So there's all kinds of emotions that go through your head when you first starting to use your machine. But, there's good news for you, because we are so fortunate in this time and age that we have all these resources available to us. For instance, there's all kinds of videos on the Gammill site. There's also the Gammill education site, where you can see and purchase classes depending on where you want to get started. YouTube is another good resource for videos. So, there's all kinds of helpful things out there to at least get you started.
Yeah, I don't know how many times I heard you girls probably found the same thing. On the tour in 2019, the Quilting with Confidence tour, I don't know how many times I heard, probably once every city that we went to, there was somebody in the class that said, "I've had my machine for over a year and haven't even turned it on." Because they're just afraid or just scared. And, those first steps are just so shaky. And, turn it on and just take a few stitches. Don't even put a real quilt up. And Brenda is not alone at all. There's a lot of people that are just frightened to get started. But,
yeah, like Sharon said earlier, it's with anything new that you buy, there there's a learning curve. Mm-hmm. And so the downside of social media sites like Pinterest, they can be intimidating as well. They're great for inspiration, but on the other hand, they can also be intimidating. Mm-hmm. Keep in mind that people usually put their best work on there. They started all exactly where you're at, Brenda. So, just start. Put your fabric on. A great way to start is choosing a panel of sorts where you can really play and see how your quilting is going to affect, the things on the panel. So don't be afraid, join the groups, because, not only is there helpful information on those groups, but it's also a source of camaraderie, where you can see that other people are going through the exact same thing than you are. And it's a confidence builder in itself if you join the groups.
Yeah, I think sometimes when you're, I know when for teaching classes, or even any time I'm learning something new, it's always easier if you break things down instead of looking at, I have to learn this and this and this and this and this. Maybe Brenda, you could just turn the machine on, and today I'm just gonna worry about bringing my bobbin thread up and making a secure start and stop. That's all I'm doing today. That's all I want to focus on today, is learning that one thing. And then tomorrow you can bring up your bobbin thread, make a secure start, and then I'm going to learn how to change the settings in regulated stitching, for example, and get comfortable with that. And then the next day you can go one step further, and so on and so on. So you're not worried about having to try to learn everything at once. You could just pick one thing to focus on in that little lesson you're going to give yourself. And this is all I have to worry about. So it's a little bit less overwhelming, maybe.
Yeah, baby stuff.
Yeah.
I mean, it isn't that, you know, you don't even need to show anybody it. So, you know, it's just you learning your machine.
Yeah. But congratulations, Brenda, on your new machine.
Yep.
Yeah.
Okay, so this post is from Letha Gunter. And I thought this was a great post. She says, I have a quilt 80 by 80 using Hops 8020 to quilt on the Vision to Elevate. Just wondering if it is feasible and what size. I'm sorry, I can't read the whole post because we are in the way, so I might screw it up.
What size row should I expect to have to keep the quilting within the quilting space to roll and be able to get to the bottom?
So I thought that was a great comment because especially, you know, if you're a newer quilter, you know, and you find all these amazing patterns, you do have to make sure that you consider your throat space on your machine because all of our machines have different throat spaces. And if I have an 18-inch throat space, obviously I cannot use a pattern where each row is 20 inches because as I roll, I'm not going to be able to complete, you know, the whole row in one pass.
Well, but you can consider too that you can make that pattern any size, so you can make it fit your row by editing it. You know, you're just going to put in more rows, so it'll make it smaller. But the really important thing with that is once you get it on your screen to zoom in and look at the background grid to make sure to understand, because you've made it smaller, how tight that might, depending on the pattern, not always, but it might make it really, really tight. And then in that case, you might want to pick something that's a little more size specific, I guess.
And that's very true because Letha has a Elevate, and therefore she is able to do that. Mm-hmm. But for any other people that are, you know, working without an Elevate, you know, the throat space in relation to the size of the pattern is definitely something to be considered.
I found that 8 inches is a good number regardless of what size of machine it is. So my very first machine was a Premier 18 and hand guided. I didn't have the Elevate, and I didn't buy any pantographs that were bigger than 10 inches. So that was my 8 inches to, if I had a really fluffy backing and some big batting, that allowed me enough space to get all the way to the bottom on a full-size quilt and not run out of space. Anything bigger than 10 inches was a bit of a problem.
Trying to raise the ruler to get a little bit more space.
Yeah, and the same thing applies now. We have 226s, and the same thing. It's the same thing. I'll go up to 18 inches, so it's like 8 inches off seems to be the magic number for us anyway. So
yeah.
Well, and the batting, you know, she listed her batting, which was the Hops 8020. And like Sharon said, you know, sometimes if you have a batting that has a much higher loft than the 8020, that's definitely a consideration as well when choosing your pattern.
Yeah, some of those patterns that you look at that come with the Elevate, really, like Jody said, if you really zoom in and look at that background grid for scale, they would be super tight if you stitch them out at 10 inches, because some of those ones I stitch out at 18 and think, oh, that's still really kind of tight, right?
Yeah.
So you know, you definitely gotta, every pattern is going to be different, and you've got to zoom in and take a look. I'm going to move on.
Sure. You want to just read that one, please, Sharon? Because
Sure.
I can't see it.
Yep. Is there a way to complete a design that was not saved on the Gamma Elevate? I'm a newbie and I got way off base yesterday and I couldn't get the design on the quilt to be on the quilted area. What happened was my bobbin ran out and I pressed the incorrect method to go over. I know now what to do about that. So it is not a quilt that is prize winning, but I would like to be able to finish it with pride. I'm sure that this happens if the power goes out, but I can't claim that. It was pure operator error. Is there an option I can use to mark quilt and then continue, or some other option? Now you guys can go first because I just read all that.
Well, I'm still trying to process what you were reading because it's a lot in there. So essentially what she was saying, how do I continue my pattern if something happened and, you know, I lost my setup? Mm-hmm. So from experience, I have an Elevate also. From experience, it has happened that, you know, there was whatever, the power went out and now I'm stuck. So when I do my editing, when I set up my edge to edge on the Elevate, I always either take a screenshot with my final setup or, you know, take a picture with my phone. Because without that, frankly, I don't remember what the final, because I made an alteration to the original pattern to fit my quilt. So I don't remember the specific dimensions, you know, 2 hours later. So that has helped me. And then I can use the, you know, start over. It depends on the pattern. It's a little bit more, it's easier if it's a pattern that goes straight across, you know, it's like linear rather than a really deep nested pattern. Then it's trickier to match it up to the previously stitched row. But I essentially start over using, no matter where I'm at on the quilt, using the exact same dimensions, like the size. I put in the entire length of the quilt again, you know, set it up like I did at the beginning, and then make sure it matches to the picture that I took. And then I'm really careful measuring and using the crosshairs to make sure, you know, it matches up where I was. And that's just my way of doing it. Doesn't mean it's the right way, but that's what's worked for me.
Yeah, I did it one time and it was just me stupidly pulling the cord out of the wall when I was doing something. So honestly, I walked away from it. I shut it off and I was like, oh, well, you know, but the next day, and again, yeah, there's probably a bunch of different ways, but so I didn't take a picture. It was my own thing. So, I mean, I wasn't, you know, whatever. So what I did was I used a ruler and I marked a line across the highest point on the pass and a line across the bottom, you know, touching the highest point and the bottom point. And I just clicked down kind of like a border from where it ended, because it was like partially through one row of the edge to edge. So I clicked 2 points and I just played around with it, because you can move your needle to see where it's gonna stitch. It was a lot of playing around. And was it perfectly lined up? No, but it was good enough. And I actually then just connected the two where it didn't quite meet. I connected them freehand. And then I did the rest as a new setup. Mm-hmm. So, you know, it's a little tricky when you can't save it. So
yeah,
but there are ways.
Sorry, go ahead.
No, you go ahead.
I was just going to echo what you said. I thought, I mean, that taking a screenshot right on the tablet is, you get into the habit of doing that, that would just save your bacon, right? You could maybe put a little sticky note on top, screenshot, until you get into the habit of every time you do a setup, take a screenshot, and then they're all right there. It'll be your most recent screenshot on your tablet.
Mm-hmm.
Prevention.
Okay, so I think we're going to take a little break at this time, and then we're going to continue in just a bit.
Today I get to show you Gamo's new professional bobbin winder. This little machine kicks out absolutely perfect bobbins every single time. It's quiet, it's simple to use, and it's built to last forever. You know, I've got to tell you, I've used all kinds of different bobbin winders over the years. And after using this one, I am completely in love with this machine. Obviously, one of the things you need for perfect stitches is a perfect bobbin. And this machine delivers one every single time. It only takes about 30 seconds start to finish, so you can wind several bobbins while staying at the machine. Or, since it stops by itself, you can walk away and come back when you need that bobbin. And now I'll just pull the finished bobbin off, drag the thread down through the thread cutter, and there we have one perfect bobbin. Check out how evenly this bobbin is wound. And the thread tension on this bobbin is perfectly consistent from the first stitch to the last.
Okay, welcome back, everyone. We have a few more posts to share with you, so Sharon, let's continue.
You want to read that one, or do you want me to read it?
Oh, I can read it.
Okay.
This is by Sylvia Corbin. Any suggestions that would cause that? Some look like knots, others like loops.
Get a zoom in here and see.
Yeah. And I'm assuming that that's, and I'm not sure, that this is on the top of the quilt. What do you guys think?
It
Or
looks
is
like it would be the top.
Yeah, it looks like piecing there.
So
It's hard to say. I mean, I've had something like that once, and what it ended up being actually was the thread. So I couldn't figure out why they were only here and there was nothing weird with the tension. So when I went back to my cone of thread and like ran my fingers along it, there were like these weird little slubs almost in the thread itself. And that was the problem. So because then it would come down and it was barely making it through the needle. And then that thing, that little slub was actually getting in there, which was really weird, because I think you buy thread, you don't generally think there's going to be anything wrong with it, right?
Mm-hmm.
I wonder if that happened, if there's a difference whether or not you're using cotton or polyester, but regardless, they're spun on a machine. So, you know, just like when we're doing something, there's always the possibility of error, you know.
And that almost looks like, you know, when you're going to get a thread break and you can see it. Mm-hmm. So it's fraying up. That's almost to me what that looks like. So you were going to have a thread break and then it made it through and you didn't.
Yes. You know what? I've been trying to put my finger on that the whole time, and that's probably it.
Like there could be a burr somewhere along your thread path, possibly. I only had a burr one time, and it was on my that little metal thing that's, I don't even know what it's called, that the thread just goes under it before it goes up and goes through the take-up lever.
That's
Yeah, and it was on my first machine, and because it was so old, there had been a groove worn in there.
Mm-hmm.
From so much thread going through there over all those years.
Mm-hmm.
So, you know, a lot of times we immediately assume it's our tension and we start messing around trying to adjust our tension. But, you know, Jody and Sharon made good points, you know, which is not really a good thing because it could be a variety of other things. So, you want to make sure you have a decent needle, changed your needle. And then, sometimes after I changed my thread and, I just pulled a new thread through, once in a while, I realize it's not good taut between the tension discs, and then I get funny things happening. So, it could be a number of things, but it's usually very easy to pinpoint what is causing it.
Yeah, that's a common one where if it doesn't get pulled tight when you pull your thread through, sometimes it pops out of that tension dial or the two discs. And then that would create a loop on the top.
You know what I've noticed, and it happens to me more often, because I'm in a hurry, but and you start quilting, you can literally hear and feel that something doesn't sound right. It really does. And I'm looking because, there it is.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think until you get really comfortable with being able to pinpoint, I have that problem, I know exactly what's causing it, so I know what to need to fix, is to write down what you're doing at the time when that problem happens. So what mode of stitching you were in. So if you were in constant or regulated, or the machine was stitching, if you're computerized, what thread you were using, what kind of fabric it was on, when's the last time you changed your needle, what's in your bobbin, just maybe make some of those notes, and so that helps you find some consistencies or inconsistencies to be able to pinpoint what happens. Because honestly, there can be a variety of reasons for some of those things, and it's a good way to kind of weed other things out. The first thing I would do would be change my needle and check the thread path. Yeah. Okay. Where's the little? I have to unzoom before I can move to the next one. There we go.
Okay, so.
Want me to make that bigger for you?
A little bit. That's too big. There we go.
Too big? There you go. Sorry.
That's fine. This one is by Susan Malarby. Suggestions needed. A customer brought me this wall hanging quilt today. She had it quilted by someone else, but doesn't like all the fullness in the center because it will not hang nicely. She asked me if I could fix it. She would prefer the design does not go through the embroidery. And she's open to suggestions. And she's gonna put it on the group and ask the experts on the group. So.
My first thought would be to make a line under each line of text. Would almost make it look like paper, like rolled paper.
Well, the first question I think should be, in general, we all quilt for other people. And I don't know if you've experienced that before, that someone asked you to quilt something that somebody already partially quilted, and that's the first thing we probably should ask. Is it, to our benefit to even accept a job like that, or does it depend on the individual situation?
I would think, looking at it, I mean, and I don't know, but I'm going to guess that someone else long arm quilted it. And if that's the case, then it was tensioned on there. You know what I mean? When it was quilted. So I don't think fullness, it looks like it because obviously that she's taken it and tried to hang it. But I, probably, and I've had this in the past. I had 2 different times that someone got a quilt done and it wasn't enough quilting. One was velvet and wool, and they didn't quilt it enough, and they used cotton thread. So as they used this quilt, the threads were just popping because the weight of the piecing of that quilt was just ripping the stitches out. And it was a mess. It was all different weights of fabrics. And the biggest concern, and I just told them ahead of time, you're probably going to get a pleat. or a pucker somewhere, because everything else was quilted. I was only supposed to fix, and I might tell someone that, and because there's probably not a lot you can, do as far as that.
Well, that's exactly right. I mean, I've had several that I did that someone had started, or did something on it, and it even had the binding on it. And I've taken them, I just tell them, like you said, Jody, because, there is no guarantee when you remount something and then you have different larger areas that are just going to hang there. Yeah. Because they're unquilted, that there could be the possibility of a pleat, and they're usually fine with it. And I'm not saying that it would happen, but,
it could.
It could, and I want them to know that, but they're usually just anxious to get, it to where they're going to be happy with it. So.
Yeah, we've done several quilts with embroidery and different things with like certain appliques that clients haven't wanted thread to run over top of it. And I like Jody's suggestion of putting the lines underneath if the quilt maker's absolutely against having anything stitched over top of the words. But what we find works really well, and we talked about this, we did another episode on quilting yes. on embroidered quilts. And we actually use the Superior monopoly thread a lot for quilts like this. And it's not that you want to put a busy design over top of it. You want to choose the design that's appropriate. So, for example, a crosshatch would probably be really nice over top of something like this. You wouldn't see the thread really over top of the embroidery because it's clear and it would just blend right in with the background. You would just see the texture. You wouldn't see any thread. And that way it's easy to go over top of the whole area. And the crosshatch isn't a design like a flower or a feather or something that's a motif that your eye is competing with to look at the words, because the words are the focus, right? So something like the crosshatch or just straight lines is a good choice because it just
works like a screen.
Exactly. So, or it really looks like a background for the words. And I mean, I definitely think it needs a little bit more quilting, and that's why it doesn't hang this as flat, because you have quilting and then a big area of not quilting and then some quilting. So, I mean, it's not a fault of who quilted it initially. That's just the nature of
and if that
densities.
Their request, not to have it quilted.
Well, and a lot of people that do embroidery still feel, because they have so much time invested in the embroidery, that they don't want anything to distract from it. But I do embroidered quilts quite a bit, and I feel it's also about educating the customer, and you use the monopoly thread, Sharon, or I like to use the 100-weight thread, the micro quilter.
Yeah.
And I can show them examples where, yes, I quilted through this embroidery, but it didn't affect in any way. And then in the end, it's their choice. But, you just.
Should we go to the next one?
Yeah, I don't know if anybody else can see if she's frozen, but totally frozen.
It's got to be, if you quilt. Okay, I was frozen for a minute. Sorry about that. So I think we can move on to the next slide.
Okay.
Okay, this is by Patty Taylor. Has anyone ever run 2 different thread colors through one needle at the same time?
I have not, so I can't answer.
I have done it a long time ago. So yeah, you can do it. The only thing about doing that is that you need to have another thread spool. So, they sell one, right? I think. they sell like a horizontal one that you can put up on the top of your machine.
I think so.
I didn't have it, and I wanted to do that. So I rigged something up myself. I won't tell you what, but it was very effective. It involved a clothes hanger. And yeah, so, and why I did it was because I was using a metallic thread. And this was a long time ago. And the metallics now are better. But the ones like 20 years ago, they really weren't that effective in the long arm, because if you've ever looked at metallic thread, you know, it has like those little, almost looks like segments on it covering the core, and it was breaking. So I put that metallic in on one cone holder, and then I ran a thin-ish, I want to say so fine or something similar on the other one. So they both went through at the same time, and the metallic wasn't breaking anymore. So you can do it.
So in other words, by using the additional thread, it strengthened, you know, your
kind of like
metallic thread.
Yeah.
And you just back off on your top tension a little bit to accommodate the two threads going through.
And it was so different because it was a different machine than I use now. But yeah, I just loosened it up and it was fine. But I would say if you want to do it, put a piece of fabric on there that you're going to do it on, something similar, and see what's going to happen when you do it, because it's kind of similar to stitching with a variegated now, because you're not always going to see both threads. Sometimes you might only notice one, because if they get so that the one thread is over top, do you know what I mean? So individual stitches can look different. So I would experiment with that before I did it, just to be safe. Nothing worse than, I mean, you know, we don't like to rip out. We surely don't want to rip out 2 threads in every stitch.
Well, and I think we need to consider the size of the needle. I personally quilt with an 18 at all times, and it does work for, you know, running a couple of threads, depending on the weight of the individual threads. But yeah, that's definitely something you should consider as well.
This looks like she's probably got, I should go in there and read the comments. She's got 45 comments on that. She probably got some good advice in there as well.
I'm sure.
Okay. So now we have a post from Linda Tilton. Has anyone quilted this quilt? It's a ton of little pieces glued on the background. Help, I need advice from someone who has quilted something like that. And I had, when I, you know, looked through the posts, I seen some similar posts, or maybe it was in the comments, I don't remember. But this one person posted that she also did a quilt like that she got from a client, and she showed her the pattern. And in the pattern, it actually stated that you're supposed to just glue it down, and then your long arm quilter is to stitch them all down. That was actually listed on the pattern. And again, I was just following the thread, but I thought, wow, that's actually written in words on the pattern that the long arm is supposed to stitch down each of those.
It's just your long armer's problem.
Essentially, yeah. I got a chuckle out of it. But, you know, in all fairness, I've gotten quilts where they asked me to do that. Like literally change 20 thread colors to match their pieces, to stitch them down. And, you know, this might sound bad, but I gave them a horrendous quote because I thought there is no way you know, it's it's not gonna look right when you stitch over all these fused applique pieces. It's just really taken away from what the design was supposed to be, and they chose not to go that route. So
yeah, we've done a few of these quilts, and most of the customers are requesting just random uneven spaced straight lines through them, which is a really good way to quilt, especially I think her name is Abilene, this cow. I could be wrong, but I think her name's Abilene. Anyway, if you look at the direction of the strips that she's cut, they're all going vertical. So if you were going to just do the straight lines, I would make sure, that's just one tip, would make sure that my lines were going horizontal, opposing that. It would just secure the little strips much better than if you did vertical lines on it. And of course, in the background, you can quilt whatever you want because it doesn't have a lot of heavy applique on it. It's just a background piece of fabric. But on top of all of that fusible and all those layers, because I know these quilts have a ton of layers, straight lines is probably the best. And I would quilt it a little bit more slowly because depending on what adhesive is being used for all of those layers, for all that applique, sometimes it can start to gum up your needle. And when your needle's coming up, and if it's just kind of grabbing, it can cause a little bit of deflection. And so you can get skipped stitches over like 4 or 5 stitches that are completely skipped. So a fresh needle, and if it's a big project, change your needle halfway through if you start to have problems with skip stitches or thread breaks. Because that I did one recently, and I actually took a picture of my new needle close up, and the needle that I just finished using, and you couldn't even see, the groove on the front of the needle where the thread just kind of sits in when it takes its stitch. You couldn't even see that groove anymore. It was so gummed up with glue. So stitching a little bit slower and maybe a bit bigger of a stitch length would maybe help.
Well, that's a good point with this, interfacing or stabilizer that they used. I've done some similar quilts like that where everything was just fused, and I could actually literally see some of the pieces coming up as I'm getting ready to quilt it, especially after I rolled it. And they're usually just wall hanging size. But my goal was to try to catch as many, of those pieces as possible. And, I actually used the spoon foot to quilt over them because then it didn't catch any of those little pieces. And now that wouldn't work if you're doing straight lines like you suggested, Sharon,
Would the spoon foot would still be helpful with the straight lines, though?
If you don't use a ruler.
Yeah, I guess that's right. It depends on if you're doing it hand-guided. But your straight lines, you wouldn't even need to use a ruler. You could just put your channel lock on.
Yeah, but that in my experience has worked well for me to make sure I catch most of those, and but they don't flip up as I'm going. So, and mostly, like I said, they're wall hangings. They're not going to be washed more than likely because there's no way you're going to, catch every single, piece with your quilting. So
yeah, we just dust those ones.
Or make a new one.
There you go.
Shake it off. Yeah. I love the colors in that one, though.
Yeah, it's pretty unique. I like that newsprint in the background.
Yeah. Linda just posted that 3 hours ago. Obviously not. Curious, Linda, if you're watching this, we'd love to see how you did quilt it and how it went for you, because you may have quilted it since before this episode airs. So if you have, we'd love to see it. If you wouldn't mind tagging us, that would be great.
Okay, and this was a post by Linda Reinert. I have a question about new flooring under my gammo. Have any of you put down laminate or the new vinyl plank? Well, I just thought that was a good conversation piece. I'm actually not sure what she means by the new vinyl plank. I know nothing about it. I just know that, it's important if we spend 10 plus hours a day, standing at the machine. I'm currently in the basement, which is cement floors. So I have, carpet right now under there, but I also wear shoes. A lot of people hate Crocs, but they're very cushiony when you're standing there for hours on end. Jody, stop. The point is, no matter what you wear or what you stand on, thank you, Sharon, it is a consideration, because you want to make sure that you can't just quilt today for 10 plus hours, but, next week, all the days too. So you have to consider what you're standing on. It makes a difference for your back and your body in general. You have to have a cushion of sort.
And, you're muted.
Sorry, we're not lip readers.
I did that because my husband just came home and the dog was starting to get excited, so I muted myself and then I forgot, sorry. I wonder if her question is more about the flooring underneath the machine itself or the flooring underneath her feet. Because I'm just curious if she's curious about
under the
weight of the machine affecting the laminate. You know what I mean? Like if it's going to cause some dents or like demarcations in the floor. So I'm curious about that. But yeah, absolutely. If it's under your feet, good pair of shoes and or ergonomic mats are a must. Those anti-fatigue mats. Mm-hmm. And I'm sure you can probably order them in the US, but in Canada, we have a place that you can order them to a specific length and then they just fit together like a puzzle piece. So you can get them 9 feet or 12 feet long, depending on how long your frame is. But I have no idea about the weight. We have hardwood floor and the machines haven't made any dents underneath, but one of our machines before, we had put a little kind of square piece of plywood with an old piece of carpet underneath. And that just distributed the weight of the foot when it touches the floor. And it also made it easier to move the machine when we needed to. That was an older machine. I don't know I guess I didn't have casters on it. So so I'm just curious if your question is about the weight of the machine affecting the floor or not.
So I have the vinyl plank in my kitchen and I would get it over wood again any day because my quilting, the room that I used to quilt in where my machine was on wood. Wood is hard. The vinyl is like, has a little bit of give. And there's a padding on the back of it. So you have a little bit of flex where wood is firm. Mm-hmm. And I don't think that the weight of the machine, my refrigerator's on it, the stove, all of those things. And I've moved it out to dust back there and it's not made any marks. I also did have the same thing, Sharon, but they were like magic sliders. Mm-hmm. So you could move your machine, but I do have, so I used to quilt on carpet and I do again now because I prefer it. And then I quilted on the wood. So there's something to keep in mind. So you know how many strings and things are involved in quilting? If you have carpet, the strings fall and they stick to the carpet. Mm-hmm. If you have wood, the strings fall and they are just laying there. And then when you pull the quilt off, they stick to the quilt. You know what I mean? So I was finding like all the random strings would stick to the quilt. And I like it better if they just stay stuck to the carpet until I suck them up.
Yeah, we're constantly Swiffering when we load and unload quilts because we have pets too. So, Swiffer all the time. All right.
Okay, I can't read all of it, Sharon.
Okay. Victoria Norman, hi. I hope I can get some advice. Not sure where to look on this page, but here's my question. I have a Gammo Classic Plus that I want to learn to free motion quilt. Heard it's better to do so in manual instead of automatic. I don't know what speed my machine should be set at so it isn't too fast or causing it to be sort of jumpy. I am cross-posting so I can get lots of help. Advice truly appreciated. Thank you.
So there are probably certain things that are better in manual, like small things like fills and stuff. Not that you have to use it, because some people never use it. And I don't think, depending on when you bought your machine, even the speed things are different. So it would be almost impossible to tell someone what to set their speed on, I think. So for manual, you just really have to just stitch.
Turn it on.
Yeah. And then if your stitches seem too big, you have to make it fast.
Well, for me, using manual, I use it like Jody was saying a lot of times for fills, but it really, for me, it depends what speed to set it at, depends on the type of design that I'm doing. You know, you can look at it this way, you know, either you can set it higher because you are comfortable with the design that you're stitching, you know, it flows better than maybe another design that you're maybe still learning. So therefore, my speed would vary. So there is different reasons why I don't think one can set a specific number. I think the main goal should be that you set it to where you're not feeling like you're stressing that the machine's running away from you. Or on the other hand, that, you know, the end result, which is the design and the stitching, that it is how you want it to be, that using too fast of a speed didn't diminish the end result. So I think that's a starting point anyhow.
Yeah, and if you're nervous about it going too fast, then I would just start with a lower number. Start with like 20 or 30 or something and just see how that feels. And like it's already been said, just look at the length of your stitches. And instead of you trying to slow down to, you know, quilt carefully, purposefully, super slow to get that stitch length that you're looking for, move the machine in a pace that you're comfortable with and have the machine meet you. Speed it up to meet where you're at so that you're moving more comfortably and your body's not going to be stiff and sore. But having a stitch regulator, which is your automatic that you're referring to, Victoria, is kind of a safe place to get comfortable with things. The manual, a lot of people seem to be too afraid to try it. So if you're willing to jump in there and try it, then that's already awesome. I would just start it lower. Like my very first machine, when I did my hand-guided pantographs in manual mode, I was at a motor speed of 70. So and that number could be completely different on a newer machine. I mean, that's several years ago. So you just got to find the things that's right for you, and depending on how fast you're moving, keeping in mind that the smaller fill you do, like Ava said, the higher stitches per inch you're going to want. And so in manual, you can still do that by slowing down your machine or speeding it up, but you can also change your stitch length in your automatic or regulated mode to help with that too. So you can achieve it almost in both. It depends on which way you're more comfortable with.
Yeah, I think it is a good skill to learn. I mean, you know, makes you more flexible.
I think once you're more comfortable with quilting in manual, it's just a little bit easier on your body too. Like I just find that, yeah, I can quilt longer in manual, but it's considerations like rulers and stopping and starting and things like that you have to pay a bit more attention to. But I think it's a smoother feel. Yeah. That's our last question.
Okay.
Stars no more.
Well, I think we covered a lot of different things today. Thank you so much for keep posting on the groups. But we really would love to, get some feedback from you. Also, in regards to other topics, we're going to continue doing the latest thread, at least for the remainder of this year. So we would love to get some input from you in regards to what you want us to talk about. I mean, I'm sure we can just sit here and talk about all kinds of things, but we want to make sure that we address in the topics that you're interested in. So thank you again for joining us, and we'll see you next time. Bye.
Bye.
Bye.